Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator, and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of DEI After 5. Okay, so if you have been following us, watching the news, following social media, you have seen that over the last few months, even a couple years, there has been a very targeted attack on this industry, on the work that we do. And so I really wanted to have a conversation with someone that can talk about, like, how did we get here? And knowing what we know, how do we move forward? And so today I am speaking to Patrice Jones, who is a consultant in this space, really so we can start to unpack and understand where we are in the context of where we are and how do we move forward. So Patrice, welcome to this episode.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
Thank you. So for those who may not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So my name is Patrice Lumumba Jones, and I am the co-founder and chief creative officer at Enlightened Media. We are at the core an educational video company, but we are currently creating a product called DEI in Context. And the first collection is actually done, which is a video-based modular educational format designed to inject historical context into existing DEI training.
So what's fascinating to me about that is so many DEI trainings start with "we're here," right, without giving that context. And it's interesting because when in doing the work that I do, I'm often asking the question, well, do you know how we got to this place?
Mhm.
Right? This is just did not come out of the blue. There are some things that happened prior to this that allowed us to be here. So I'll turn that question to you. Like, how did we get to this place where we are now in a political season where this industry, specifically diversity, equity, and inclusion, is central in the attack, right? Which feels a little different than before. So can you talk to us about how we got to this place?
Yeah. So it's funny in that I think we kind of live in this place, right? I think there's a perception around social progress where people look at it as if we are climbing this mountain, and wherever we put our flag down for now, we're going to stay there and then catch our breath and move forward. The problem is there is no place to put your flag down. There is no way to anchor yourself to that slope. And if you take your foot off the gas or let go of the rope, you're going backwards. So I think the struggle is more of a tug of war than it is an expedition to the top of some mountain or towards some summit. And I think if you understand that, then you start to see how these patterns start to repeat themselves over time. So in our series, what we did was we started in 1619, which was when kind of the origins of racism happened. And what's really interesting about that, and I'll give you the short version is, you probably heard of Bacon's Rebellion. But what happened with Bacon's Rebellion was a wealthy white landowner wanted to expand into Indian territory in order to, grow his land, grow his revenue profits and whatever. And the governor of Virginia did not want to do that, basically because there was peace with those indigenous peoples, and he didn't want to disrupt that. So what Bacon did was organize the faction of white indentured servants, black indentured servants, some wealthy landholders, and essentially led a march on the governor's mansion. In fact, they burned the governor's mansion down. Now, eventually they put that rebellion down, but the people with the juice decided this is not going to happen again. And their answer to that was to create a clear distinction between the Africans and the white people, whether they were indentured servants or just poor farm workers or whatever, and said that the Black people were going to be slaves. And what's more significant is that their children would be slaves. There had never been a hereditary tie to slavery before that time. And so what it did was it took the heat off the top, and all those people in the middle or towards the bottom, the white people, focused their attentions on staying ahead of or on top of the Black slaves. And so that became the point of friction. That became where all the animosity happened. And that was the foundation of the racism that we see today. And so moving forward, slavery became incredibly profitable. By 1860, the value of slaves or enslaved people in the United States, and I don't mean the work that they did, I mean the literal value assigned to those people was greater than the value of all the industry and all the railroads in the United States. The highest concentration of millionaires in the Mississippi Delta, the highest concentration of millionaires in the country were in the Mississippi Delta. The number one exporter of textile goods in the world was the United States, built on slave labor in the South, right? So the economy is built on this. And you hear people say it all the time, this country is built on slavery. No, this economy was built on slavery. So that, have you ever known people with that kind of immense economic interest to give it up voluntarily? No, which is why we have a civil war.
Right.
It was in fact fought over slavery. The South lost, but what happens? The rich people regroup and say, okay, we can't have slavery, but what can we do that is as close to this as possible? Which then gives you sharecropping. And Jim Crow.
Yep.
And you needed Jim Crow, which was the enforcement mechanism, right, to intimidate people so that they wouldn't leave. Because once enslaved people were free, there was also competition in the North to get these low-paid workers into the North, places like Chicago and New York, up the Eastern Seaboard, in order to drive industrialization as well. And so there had to be something to keep the Black folks in the South that wasn't paying them, because they wasn't going to do that. But what they did was decided to intimidate them. And what you saw was over 4,400 Black people lynched between 1877 and 1950, which is a way to keep them in line and keep them working at these wages that were, barely above what they needed to survive, sometimes below what they needed. And the point of all of this is that racism is systemic and institutional. And so this money class has been able to maintain a relationship with Black folks so that they are able to try to keep them in these roles that benefit their industry, their economy, but don't necessarily enfranchise Black folks to be a part of that or to have a meaningful role in that. And you see that play out over and over again. Once sharecropping was over, that led into the convict lease system, whereas you can hire or you bring imprison people into the system as free labor or nearly free labor.
Right. So which still happens today.
Yeah. And corporate prisons and all of this. So, right. And so there's an entire industry built not only on prison labor, but also on imprisoning people in the first place.
Right.
Right. It's a huge business. And it's not just the people, the corporate prisons. It's also the entire legal apparatus is built on, the largest prison population per capita by far in the world is in the United States. And it is an industry. And like all industries, there are people who are dedicated to making sure that you have customers and making sure that you have the raw materials in this case, which is employees to imprison. And so when you start to understand the institutional factors around racism, then you start to understand that this is something that other institutions, if we are serious about changing this, then other institutions have to be involved and leverage their resources. You're not going to vote your way out of this. You're going to need companies that have these values, they really have the values that all of them profess to have around equality and equity and all of this, to start to say, well, where does their influence lie? I mean, they lobby Congress all the time for things that make it easier for them to do business or make it more profitable for them to do business.
Right.
Can they be lobbying for equity? Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, I was talking to someone on the show not too long ago where she said, diversity is not the issue, right? Inclusion is not the issue. The fight is about equity. And that's what
Yes.
people are having the hardest time with.
Mhm.
And it's the irony in this is, right, the name of my company is the Equity Equation, because that's what I
Yes.
wanted to focus on. How do you remove barriers,
Mhm.
provide support, right, so that everyone can succeed? And it's that process that is so damning for some people, because they're
Yeah.
like, now I have to look at the inequities
Right.
when I'm benefiting from the inequities. And so I don't want you to take my slice of the pie so that everybody else can benefit, right? I want to keep my slice of the pie and the rest of this pie over here. And
Mhm.
so how do I then pivot this in a way where no one else is worthy or valuable and
Right.
of being even at the table, right? So, and there's something that you said too. There was two things that stood out for me when we think of, how did we get here and the history that you laid out. And as someone who, grew up in Virginia and
Mhm.
understanding the unique position that Virginia has had in a lot of the foundation of this, and having gone to the College of William and Mary, right, in colonial Williamsburg, and
Yeah.
understanding the deep history of this country. We're not talking about the 1600s, right? We're talking about the 1950s when sharecropping kind of came to an end, per se. I was reading something the other day that Ruby Bridges just turned 70. This is
Mhm.
not ancient history. Like,
Sure.
these are folks that are here and with us. There was someone the other day on TikTok that was saying his aunts and uncles were sharecroppers. And he was not an older
Mhm.
person, right? His aunts and uncles picked cotton,
Yeah.
and they are still living. So we are not talking about this history that is so far removed from where we are. And the flip side of that is the same people that were trying to hold on to these institutions of enslavement are still alive and around as well too.
Right. Right. And so I always think it's interesting when I think about the fact that I am part of the first post Jim Crow generation. I was born in 1967. Civil Rights Act was passed in 1965. Right. If
Mhm.
you look at a history of racism in America on a timeline with 1619 here and 1965 here, or present day here, the time since 1965 looks like this.
Yeah.
It's such a short amount of time that discrimination has been illegal relative to the total timeline. So part of this is, where would we expect to be right now, given this is our foundation? And also the fact that this is our foundation points to, which is why when you take your foot off the gas or you let go of the rope, the stasis of America
Hmm.
is a is founded in institutional racism. If we go back to that equilibrium point for this country, it's going to go back there. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? That's what we have to understand. So this is an ongoing struggle. This is not something, a task that you do and when it's done, it's over and we can all rejoice. It is an ongoing effort to maintain justice and, to that extent, equity. And we can't stop because we just have too much momentum going in a direction that is not beneficial for any of us, really. Some people, there is some short-term gain in maintaining wealth, but ultimately what we know in the field of DEI is that if we have diverse workforces, if we have people collaborating from different environments and different backgrounds and different ideas and innovation, we're going to move forward. And that innovation is so much more important than it's ever been, because if you look at the existential threats that are out there, both in terms of things like climate change, but also what we see happening politically, that feels a lot like 1877 right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you look at, I think this is a really interesting parallel, and I am not a historian. I'm a content creator with an activist mindset, right? So I work with people, I work with historians, and to try to help tell these stories. But the way that Reconstruction ended was that there was a disputed election, and several states, including I think Virginia was one of them, Oregon was one of them, but southern states in general refused to certify the election. Sound familiar?
Deja vu. Yeah.
What happened is there was a compromise. It's called the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. Rutherford B. Hayes was running against Samuel J. Tilden. And the compromise was that, yes, we will let Rutherford B. Hayes ascend to the presidency, but in exchange, the federal troops had to be withdrawn from the South. The federal troops were the ones that were upholding,
Maintaining. Yeah.
the newly found freedom of these formerly enslaved people. So we'll give you the presidency, but we get to do what we want with these newly freed enslaved people.
Yeah.
And that was the compromise. After all that, the Civil War and all of that, we were a bargaining chip for political power in the end. And Ted Cruz brought up Hayes-Tilden as precedent when he made the argument that there should be a compromise on January 6, 2021. And because so many of us don't know history, he said Hayes-Tilden and nobody blinked.
Right.
Nobody blinked.
And it's just interesting to me. It's all by design, right? As well, like our educational system is all by design. And I've always been a firm believer in you're not going to learn anything about this country from a school book, because it is catered in a certain way. It's tailored in a certain way. And I was blessed, though I grew up in Virginia, was blessed to grow up basically on the campus of Virginia State University. And by doing that, one of the greatest historians in the country at that time was a professor at Virginia State and went to my church, right? So I had this ability to be able to ask a historian whenever there was a book report, Dr. Toppin, I got a question, right? But I had that resource to, for me. And I've spoken to other, folks that are very rich in their understanding of US history as it relates to the African-American experience. And none of that came from a classroom. It was all the people in the community sharing their stories. It was word of mouth. It was, going to historical landmarks that may not be the tourist attraction, but you're getting to understand what that meant, right? Pocahontas Island. If I say that to people outside of Virginia or outside of the Petersburg area, they may not know what that is, right? But that was a portion of Petersburg that had freed slaves. I mean, I'm sorry, freed people and created their own community. Many of those folks became the foundation of Petersburg that you know today. So, this is me going on my soapbox, but I think that historical context is so critical in this conversation.
Yes.
And, as you said, race is kind of the key component to it. But then when you look at gender and sexual orientation and all these other aspects of DEI, they would not be where they are now had it not been for the work done around race in this country. And I think that there are people that forget who who was in the forefront and on the front lines of this equity work, this social justice work, and what started kind of branching that out. When you start looking at all of these other identities, and not saying that they're not important. However, we are also in a place where I feel there's this one-uppedness that starts to happen, and race starts to fall to the back, right? Well, we don't want to talk about race. Why do we need to talk about race? Let's talk about gender.
So interestingly, so the whole idea around what DEI kind of boils down to is we have to understand that we are in a system that places primacy on the aspirations and desires of cis white men. That's just it. That's who the country was built for. If you look at, who could vote, right? We talk a lot about the founding fathers, like the founding fathers were these, upstanding, great people who, sought this egalitarian society. No, they sought a egalitarian society among wealthy male white landowners. And what you start seeing is the further you get away from those people in this caste system that we have, because that is what it is, those are the harder battles to fight. Right. So Black people being at the bottom of that caste system, there's a lot less willingness to talk about equity for us than there is about people who are closer to white men in the caste system, like, say, for instance, white women, right? Or gay white men, right? And so it just breaks down, along the lines of the caste system, right? And so I think it's really important that we understand that we are talking about a shift of power and a shift of resources, and people don't give up what they got voluntarily. And so we can't be surprised when things happen like, oh, wow, they're coming at DEI. Of course they're coming at DEI. Nobody gives up anything. And to be very clear, if you change that dynamic around and we flip this caste system the other way, it would be the same situation. Right. This is just people. It's a people thing. And this is just how the people are distributed in our current arrangement. Right.
People,
so if you go to India,
and power.
Thank you. Very well. That sounds like something you learned in school that I didn't.
It just came to the top of my head.
Yeah. But that's it. And so I think a lot of times when we start having these conversations and you start hearing this stuff about reverse racism and all, no, we're just saying that given our current arrangement, then equities are hitting the people at, below the top. And it's not ideal. It's not what we should have. We should be striving for something that's a lot more fair for everyone. And we need to put some controls in place to do that. And since you happen to be sitting at the top, taking advantage of the situation, it's going to feel like people are coming for your stuff. Or we're just trying to fix it. And that's what this is.
And it's interesting because, there's that mindset of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's not broken for us. It's fine for us. And so therefore, what is there to fix? Especially, again, if it threatens our economy.
Right. And right? Because the economy could be better. The economy would be better if everyone could participate. So it's not the economy, it's what you're getting out of it specifically. What those folks are getting from this arrangement is not equitable, but it feels good for them.
And I'm a visual person, right? So what I just started envisioning was, part of this attack right now is on immigration. And it's a broad term, immigration. However, they've created it in such a way that you see a certain type of person, right? They've started naming certain countries that's part of this problem of immigration, and how I'm still trying to figure out if I have a Black job, but that's a whole other conversation. But, these immigrants are taking Black jobs, and, no one can really define what those Black jobs mean. However, to the group that you're talking about, it's a very specific thing that they're they are discussing. And it is now, when you look at that caste system, it is creating this charge of, oh, they're taking the jobs of this particular group that aligns closely with us. And so we want to get you enraged so
Right.
that then this is now the enemy. When
Right.
in
It's
fact,
Bacon's rebellion. It's Bacon's rebellion, right? Convince the people that are below you that they shouldn't worry about what you got. You should worry about these people who are coming for the little that you have. It's coming from the
right,
bottom, not from the top.
right,
So I mean, it's not hard to understand how these things work. These are techniques that have been deployed around the world, right? And it takes a
yeah,
lot of effort, though. It takes a lot of effort to maintain a lie.
mm,
You
that
know what I mean?
part,
Like there's so many moving parts that you need to have in place to convince people that water falling from them on the sky is not in fact rain,
right,
right? That is something else actually, and that's what we've always had here. And what we need to do to understand this, I think, is to draw the lines between what the people in power say they care about, because they know what to say. We want everyone to have the same opportunity. We want everyone to be successful. All of that. It's when you start getting into, well, how do we get to that, right? And why are
what does
these
that look like?
discrepancies here, right? So I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, so great. Let's talk about how we get there. You said you care about, like, for instance, people that are pushing against DEI because they say it doesn't work. They never propose something that will work. They never
Right,
say, well, actually, here's how DEI needs to be fixed. Their agenda is to move DEI aside so there's no one advocating for equity,
right.
not
And
to
because the
fix
question I
it so
always
that, okay,
have is, what aspect of DEI is not working?
right, right.
Let's get very specific about it, because now we can create a solution for that piece.
Yes.
But as a
And
whole,
to what extent is the areas of DEI that aren't working, are they not working because of efforts to thwart it? So
right,
why aren't you helping to eliminate the resistance to DEI? As opposed to saying there's something built into it, like this mechanism of inequality. They act as if it is just from God,
yeah,
right? It's just the environment, it's the weather. Not that there are people who are actively working to ensure that opportunities are not distributed equally,
right,
right? And that's the problem. If you want to fix it, well, let's talk about people who are doing things that are in opposition to the goals of equality.
right. Or the systems we have in place
Yes,
that
yes.
continue to
Yeah,
support inequality.
right. There are
Yeah,
just so many things that on the face of it just make no sense at all. If you look at mass incarceration, right? And you look at the numbers in terms of, starting in 1970, and I don't have the exact percentage gain, but it's ridiculous what happened in terms of incarceration
yeah,
starting in the 1970s up to the year 2000. Right.
yeah,
And the other thing is, no one thinks that prison actually rehabilitates anyone. However, it is the stated goal. But there is almost
mhm,
no public outcry about people going into prison and coming out without any marketable skills, without addressing any of the challenges that got them there in the first place. The mental illness piece of this is huge, but
yeah,
no one says, we really need to do something because prison isn't rehabilitating anyone, and a lot of people come out worse off than they were when they went in. Right? That's a
yeah. But
major
that's the
problem.
goal. That's the
Yeah,
goal, to get them back in.
right. And it feeds into the discourse around characterizing some people as incorrigibly criminal,
Yeah,
right? And then that
savages,
even,
monsters. Yeah,
yeah, and that helps, with a lot of other things that are on the agenda. But it takes a lot to get people to kind of sit here and not think about those things, and not to start put two and two together and start to understand that we're not really trying to get better.
Well, I like that you said that, because what that says to me is, as DEI practitioners, understand the history. Like, you have to
Right.
understand the greater context, because again, you can't see patterns if you don't understand the history.
Right.
You have to be able to understand, okay, where have we seen this before? What happened? What worked? What didn't work? What's different now? Right? How do we shift? How do we totally blow it up? I'm all about, like, just blow it
Yeah.
up sometimes too. You need to do that. But what does it take? And in order to do that, you have to truly be a student of history, a student
Yes.
of, and not just US history, to your point, not just US history. You have to understand what these things have looked like globally, right? And I think that's what's kind of happening right now with a lot of the pushback that's happening in the Middle East, is
Hmm.
people are calling it, okay, this is apartheid. We've seen this before.
Right.
We've seen this before. And so we understand this from a greater global context. It's a lot going on right now, right? It's heavy. I was having a conversation with someone earlier today where I was just like, I'm tired.
Hmm.
I'm just mentally tired of, it's a constant fight. And so with that, what are the things that you do to take care of you? How do you fill your cup as you are doing this work? Because it can be frustrating at
Yeah,
some times.
it is. I mean, from a like a self-care standpoint, I try to do some yoga,
Mm,
and some meditation, and get my breathing together. It's really important to, I think, to focus on diet.
mm,
uh, People don't understand how much of an effect what you put into your body has to do with your overall health, your overall mental state.
yes.
So that's a big part of it as well. But I think also there's a lot of joy in this world. Also, like, that's
Yeah.
the beautiful thing about human beings. My brother just got back from Morocco, and he was telling me how he's in Morocco and like going to Marrakesh and Casablanca, and how clearly these people don't have much, but they've adapted their whole mentality around have a beautiful bedroom. And then if you have a beautiful bedroom, try to have a beautiful living room. And then now
Mm,
you're surrounded, the places that you spend the most time are surrounded by beauty, but they don't spend their time thinking about what somebody else has and how can I get that, are focusing to that extent kind of on the negative. Now, granted, what role does that play in your ability to drive things forward if you're really kind of focused internally? But the lesson that I took from that is find the beauty that you have access to and don't lose track of that,
yeah.
right? Because the sky is above us all, right? The trees blow for everybody, the moon is there for everybody. So find those things in which you can take some solace and feel some happiness and beauty, and try to use that to recharge yourself and also other people. There are
Yeah.
so many really interesting, really great people. If this wasn't a problem, I wouldn't get to talk to you, right? I wouldn't be able to kind of build my network of people to include people who are interesting to talk to, that you learn from.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that, and I think that's also the commonality that we can have with some of the people that maybe are not working for the things we're working for, or
Yeah.
maybe pushing for something different. That there is some commonality of humanness that may allow us to have some of these conversations, because what we're trying, to me, the whole thing about DEI is trying to say, you believe in human beings, right? You believe human beings should be treated, with fairness, right? Everybody says yeah. So let's talk about how we're going to do that,
What
right?
does that
That's
look like?
at the
Yeah.
that's at the core of it. Is what does that look like, and what can we do to
Mhm.
work together to get there? Now, the thing that
Yeah.
we also have to understand, and I think this is a big challenge, is companies try to embrace these values, or at least outwardly embrace these values, about equity and diversity and inclusion, without tying them to any kind of political position, right? But if we are talking about a redistribution of wealth, which is what this really is, of opportunity, the redistribution of opportunity turns into a redistribution of wealth. If we are talking about that is inherently political. And so you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
Right. So, and there is no political middle in this country anymore. Right.
No, and it's
that's out the window.
interesting because even in not saying something is political, your actions and what people experience will tell you your political leanings of the organization.
Yeah. You don't have to put a D or an R and R on it for it to be political. Right. And it just is. Right. And so I think having to understand that, and I'm also a marketer. You know, the bulk of my career has been spent in marketing. So a lot of times companies, after George Floyd was killed, everybody had these statements, and I had never heard companies talk about systemic institutional racism before that moment. It was always about bigotry. Oh, there's no place in this organization for bigotry, racism, but they never acknowledged. They never acknowledged that the game was rigged until then, right? Because it was so shocking, right? And that was for many companies. It was a reflection of what they were hearing in the market. Their customers were appalled. Their customers were going, wow, I guess there might be systemic racism. And so they felt they had to do something about it. And now that it's kind of cooled off and the other side has come up and you see the backlash, those companies that really didn't believe it, they're scrapping their programs. They're pulling back. But I would offer there's not as many companies pulling back as I think we're being led to believe, because what you hear about is change. You don't hear about companies that are staying the course. That's not news. But Jack Daniels saying, hey, we're scaling back our DEI program, our Lowe's pulling their thing back. That's news.
The whole Jack Daniels thing is so ironic anyway, because I'm just like, where did Buddy get his recipe from? But
exactly,
that's neither here nor there.
Well, it's here and there.
How can people get in contact with you if they wanted to learn more about what you do and the content that you all are creating?
So go to DEIincontext.com. We finished Patterns in American Racism, which is our first module that's available now to companies. The idea is it's a module consisting of 6 videos, starting with slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow and lynching, housing discrimination, mass incarceration, and I do an intro video for that. There are learning modules around it, which give you not only discussion questions for facilitated discussions, there's check your knowledge quizzes there. There's ways to get involved with different issues. But the idea is that DEI initiatives and training, learning about this politics, learning about this history, which was already established as politics, is what's going to help you understand what your company can do and why having a session that essentially, helps you figure out why you can't touch Black people's hair is not what DEI is about, right? You got to take away from that I work at an institution that has the ability to drive real change. They have the resources to drive change. They have they also have the manpower to drive change, the people power to drive change. And we have to be demanding of them, because think about the statements that companies made. Gap Incorporated, 55% of our management is going to be people of color. Wells Fargo was like $8 billion we're going to set aside to help Black businesses. However, 5 years later, nobody's checking to see where they are on those claims, and the only people that can kind of create that kind of accountability are the people that work there.
Yeah, right? That's very true.
And so your DEI program or your DEI leadership, your ERGs are the people that have the ability to go to the C-suite and say, hey, how are we on those milestones? What are we doing with that management initiative? What's the percentage now? How many of those Black startups have received money at this point? Where are we relative to the goals that you set aside 5 years ago? That's what DEI can do internally, is to reinforce those standards that have already been set. You've already claimed this is what you're going to do. Let's
Right.
talk about how we get there.
Right. And I want to add to that. I think it's important that the questions that are being asked don't come from those that are from marginalized communities only.
Right.
Right. Everyone needs to be asking those questions at
Yep.
all levels of the organization, because that's where you start to get change happening,
Yeah.
when it's not just the small group over in the corner
Yes.
causing a stir. It is the collective asking these questions and holding leadership accountable.
Or asking who's expected to explain racism, right? If you ask me to explain racism, I only know about this part of racism. I don't know how it works because I'm not doing the racism. You know what I mean? Like, the people who are doing it are the people who understand it best. But it always falls on me. The way I got into this work was after George Floyd was killed. I had recently left the company I had been with for 23 years in college, higher education publishing. And I started getting calls of people wanting me to be on panels, me to give presentations on racism, right? And I did it, and I learned a lot, and I think I helped people learn a lot. But how crazy is that? That I
Yeah.
should be the person to educate you on this thing that I
And
am
what you do.
receiving, not that I am giving out or that I am perpetrating.
Yeah.
But that's a really interesting dynamic, that people of color become the experts on discrimination when we're at the foot
And
end of it. Yeah,
yeah.
right. We're catching it. We're not doing it, but yet we're
Right.
expected to be the ones who educate everyone on it.
Right. Patrice, thank you so much for being with us. We could have gone on for, like I said, days with these
Yeah,
topics, because I
or
think it's
two.
so, oh, right, right. Because I think it's so important that as we do this work and we are trying to unpack what this anti-DEI effort is,
Mhm.
right? Understanding the historical context, understanding kind of the why behind some of these attacks and who's being
Yes.
attacked in this space. And so, thank you for at least having us start thinking about those things. As I say, it's
Good.
dropping some nuggets for us to pick up and really start to unpack and think about, okay, what don't I know in this space so that I can show up differently, especially as a
Mhm.
DEI practitioner. So thank you so much
You're very
for
welcome.
helping us today.
One thing I would say, that if you believe that DEI is worth fighting for, then fight for it.
Yeah. Amen. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that is tuned in today. Again, as always, I'm like hoping you were able to grab some nuggets of information. My wheels are spinning on this conversation because there's so much more to do. This job is not done. And so thank you for being here. Tune in every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and continue to support this work. And as always, until next time, have a good one.